You're launching a new show or a channel. You're locking in a title, a name. I know. You Googled it. Maybe you even searched the Trademark Office database and nothing came up. So all good, right? Wrong. I mean, sure, that's a good start. It's a responsible approach. It's exactly how a lot of smart creators research things before locking in their show names. You weren't careless, you weren't reckless, you tried to do your homework. And the problem is, those searches don't always tell you what you think they're telling you, because the most expensive trademark problems usually aren't the obvious ones. They're the ones that are hiding just outside the places you checked. And by the time they surface, your show isn't small anymore. In today's show, we're talking about this misplaced sense of confidence and what can go wrong. And then I'll share how to avoid these problems by taking a more professional approach and how I work with creators to make sure they're fully protected so they can launch, grow confidently, and achieve the impact, influence, and income they deserve. Welcome back to Legit Podcast Pro. I'm Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer. And for 33 plus years now, I've been helping folks in the creator economy and in entertainment industries with the strategy and the legal aspects of their businesses to protect themselves, their intellectual property, and to make smart contracts that just make sense for their long-term success. So, in the cold open, I told you about the confidence trap that comes with searching publicly available sources like Google and the US Trademark Office database. They're good, but they're not really enough. So let's look at this carefully for a moment. Most creators believe that if there were a serious trademark problem, they would see it. They would assume trademark risk works like plagiarism detection. If someone's using the exact name in the exact same way, it'll show up immediately. But trademark law doesn't revolve just around identical copying. It revolves around likelihood of confusion. That means similarity in sound, similarity in meaning, even across multiple languages. There's a doctrine of foreign equivalence. Similarity in the commercial impression that's made. Similarity in the relatedness of the goods or services. But here's the thing. Two names don't have to match perfectly in order to be a legal conflict. They only have to be similar enough that consumers might reasonably believe the brands are connected. And that's a much more nuanced analysis than most creators realize. So when you type your show name into Google, what you are really seeing, well, what are you really seeing? You're seeing what ranks. You're seeing what's optimized. You're seeing what has digital visibility. What you're not seeing is who owns enforceable trademark rights, who has filed a pending application, maybe as recently as just a few days earlier, who operates regionally but doesn't rank nationally, who exists offline but has legal protection in place. Google's a search engine. Trademark rights are legal rights, and the search engine may not be sufficient to do the job. The fact that something doesn't appear in a search result doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It only means that it doesn't rank in the engine. And those are very, very different things. Google creates this powerful illusion of completeness. It feels like you've surveyed the landscape, but legally, you've really only skimmed the surface. Now, let's say you went further. You searched the USPTO, the Patent and Trademark Office database. That's commendable, but here's where things become more complex. Running a search and interpreting the search are not the same thing. For example, imagine your show is called Modern Media Mindset. So you search for that exact phrase, that makes perfect sense, and nothing identical appears. But what about something like Modern Mindset Media, or Media Mindset Collective, or Modern Media Masters, or Mindset Media Group? Each one of those might raise a question. Not automatically a problem, but definitely a question. So trademark analysis, the availability and registrability analysis, often requires looking at phonetic similarity, conceptual similarity, industry overlap, the likelihood of one party or the other expanding into the other's market. That's not intuitive. That is what involves really professional judgment. So here's another issue that creators might miss. You might think, well, that company isn't in the podcasting space, so we're not going to have a problem. Well, that may not really be true. Trademark protection can extend across related industries. If someone owns a mark in entertainment, education, digital media, or online courses, well, that might overlap with your podcast's natural path for expansion. Now, remember, most podcasts don't just stay podcasts. No, they become courses, books, membership communities, conference. They sell merchandise, licensing opportunities. And when you expand, your exposure expands too. So that name that seemed harmless inside the narrow category of podcast may very well collide with someone else's broader business footprint. Conflicts often appear when growth kind of widens that lens. So think about this progression. Year one, you launch your podcast. It's modest. You're experimenting. Year two, you start to gain some traction. You build an audience that trusts you. You start thinking about monetization. In year three, you start to sell merchandise, maybe creating digital products. You explore partnerships. Suddenly now you are not just a podcast, you're a whole brand. And that's when deeper scrutiny happens. Sponsors start to do due diligence. Partners ask questions. Lawyers look closer at things. And if your brand foundation is fragile, that's when the cracks will start to appear. Let me give you a case study, sort of a composite example drawn from a number of situations I've seen in my practice. A creator launches a podcast. We'll call it Elevate Influence. They Google it. They check podcast platforms. They even search the trademark database for identical matches. And there's nothing there. Nothing alarming appears. A couple years later, the show's grown. They begin offering leadership coaching and paid workshops under the same brand. And then they receive correspondence from a company called Influence Elevated, which has owned a registered trademark in leadership training services for several years, or maybe it's consulting services. Names are not identical, but they're similar. Industries, not identical, but there's overlap. Now the creator faces difficult choices. Rebrand after all that growth and effort you put in, or negotiate some kind of a coexistence, or engage in a costly dispute. All because that initial surface level search didn't reveal the deeper conflict risk. Now, trademark conflicts rarely show up during your brainstorming. They show up at the higher stakes moments, when you file your own trademark application and get a refusal from the trademark office, or someone files an opposition to your application, or when a sponsor's legal team conducts their due diligence and starts asking hard questions, or maybe it's when you expand into merchandise or education or some other kind of thing. When a competitor becomes aware of your growth, it can come up. In other words, conflicts tend to surface when you have something valuable, something at stake. That's what makes them disruptive. So what happens if you do have to rebrand? Well, it's not just changing a name. It's re-recording old intros and outros, redesigning artwork, updating every social handle, redirecting domains, explaining the change to your audience and getting them to stick around, rebuilding your SEO momentum, losing discoverability, albeit temporarily, reprinting materials. Now, you can recover from that, but it costs. It costs time, it costs money, it costs energy, and most importantly, it costs momentum. Momentum is the hardest asset to rebuild once it's been interrupted. Now, this isn't all about intelligence, and it's about scope of things. Most creators are brilliant in their craft. They understand the content they're making. They understand audience engagement. They understand growth. But trademark clearance is a specialized analysis. It really requires looking deeply at not just the direct matches, but all the close variations, phonetic equivalents, industry adjacency, expansion trajectories, registration status, pending applications, and risk tolerance. That is not something that Google is going to be able to do for you or help you evaluate very well. So one of the most dangerous signals in this whole process is silence. You search, you find nothing alarming, you interpret that silence as safety. But silence in search results isn't a confirmation of freedom or that it's clear. It's simply absence of obvious conflicts in visible databases. That's a very different conclusion. No, professional clearance isn't about certainty. It's about risk assessment, and risk assessment is strategic. Now, if your podcast is merely a little hobby, something you're dabbling at, then this risk calculus may be different for you. But if your podcast or channel is part of a business or is becoming one, well, then your brand is an asset. And assets deserve protection. They deserve due diligence. They deserve strategic thinking before they start to accumulate real value that would be harmed dramatically by having to rebrand. So you wouldn't build your house on unstable soil knowingly. You wouldn't invest years of effort into structure without understanding its foundation, right? Your brand name is the foundation of your media enterprise, and foundations should be evaluated carefully. and in a professional manner. Now, professional brand strategy considers where you are now and where you're going, where you intend to go. What industries overlap with yours? What risks are tolerable? What risks are avoidable? Whether a trademark registration strengthens your position or not, how enforcement would work if it was needed. And casual checking asks only one question: does anyone else appear to be using this exact name? Very different levels of analysis. And one supports long-term growth more effectively, much more effectively than the other. Now, this isn't all about fear. That's not why I'm here. It's about clarity. If your show name matters to you, if your audience is growing, if you see your podcast as part of a larger business strategy, guessing isn't a good strategy. If you want a clearer understanding of where your name stands, what risks may exist, and what your options are before investing further in growth, well, the next step is a conversation. You can set up a trademark strategy call with me by going to gpf.link/TM call. Actually, firemark.com/TM call will get you there. We'll look at what you've already done, what potential conflicts may exist, how expansion could affect exposure, and what makes sense for your situation. No pressure, just informed decision-making. It's at firemark.com/TM call, TM for trademark call. Okay, now next time we're going to talk about the part that creators rarely plan for: the feared and loathed rebrand, what it costs, what it disrupts, and how to avoid being forced into it at the worst possible moment. Because when trademark issues surface after growth, the cost isn't theoretical. That momentum is valuable, and momentum is a lot harder to rebuild than it is to protect. So I'm Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer. If you'd like to reach out to me for that trademark consultation, just go to firemark.com/TM call, and I look forward to speaking to you. Until next time, have a great one. Get out there, keep on podcasting. See you next time.